Welcome to the Com Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizenhausen. December 6th. Today there will be a lot of interesting news. So in this episode, a massive strike on Ukraine and the West is finally taking off the white gloves and preparing a full maritime blockade of oil from the Russian Federation. And also about Donald Trump's great oil purge, which is pushing Russia out of the global market. The Kremlin is urgently lowering the Iron Curtain, shutting off global messengers. Meanwhile, unidentified drones circled over NATO's nuclear shield and breached the defenses of a secret submarine base in France. Putin is preparing a triumphant return to Syria. The most interesting part is whom he chose to play the role of the new Assad. And the shameful excuses in India, how Putin squirmed. These phrases simply have to be heard. And we'll also talk about the blow to what is most sacred for Russians. All this and more will be in today's episode. If this is your first time on this channel, welcome and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Well, I'd like to start with a congratulation. Congratulations on the Day of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, to the defenders of Ukraine, to the women defenders of Ukraine. This is a day for great people. This is a day for true titans. As long as the defenders of Ukraine stand, all of Ukraine stands. You are the ones who stopped an army that was superior both in numbers and in equipment. Not only did you stop them, you made them retreat. And you showed the whole world their true face. The true face of this so-called empire. And eternal glory and honor to all who have fallen in battle. To the warriors of Ukraine. And honor as well to the soldiers, sergeants and officers who continue the fight. And on this day, I want to wish you the most important thing. Come back alive to your loved ones. Glory to the armed forces of Ukraine and glory to Ukraine. I had many meetings with the military today. I'll talk about that a bit later. But as for the so-called empire, this one, well, it's just so predictable. I mean, the bold psychopath, of course, carried out a massive shelling last night. Well, of course he did it. No one doubted that on the eve of the Day of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, he would do this. He launched 653 attack drones and 51 missiles. There were ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and Kinzhal aeroballistic missiles among them. They targeted the energy infrastructure. I won't go into detail, but this is yet another massive bombardment aimed at trying to deprive us of our energy infrastructure, to leave the people of Ukraine in the cold, without light, without heat. But it's important to understand that in the fourth year of the full-scale invasion, this is all he can do now in terms of putting pressure on Ukraine and Ukrainians. That's it, he has no other tools left anymore. And here we need to understand that Kyiv, which was supposed to fall in 3 days, has somehow turned into the question of whether Russian troops will take Pokrovsk in the fourth year or not. Will they take it by the end of the year or not? That's how things turn out. A bit later, by the way, there will be an awakening among high-ranking Russian military officials who have made some very interesting statements. But for now, friends, I want to tell you that today we are continuing to raise funds for our soldiers who are defending us. I received a message from the fighters of the Special Forces Company of the Chervona Kalina Brigade, 1st Azov Corps, our legendary Azov fighters. They reached out with an important request. Right now they need to purchase a ground robotic complex, Murahamini Ant Mini. And in just 1 day we've already covered half of the fundraising goal. So if we all pull together today, we can definitely complete this fundraiser for our legendary Azov fighters. And the soldiers have recorded a message for us. Please listen to it.
Бійці роти спеціального призначення бригади Червона Калина 1-го корпусу Національної гвардії Азов. Разом з глядачами каналу Бориса Тізенгаузена відкриваємо збір на наземний роботизований комплекс Мураха Міні, який допоможе у виконанні бойових, логістичних та інших завдань на лінії фронту. Ми вдячні за ваші донати, поширення збору та вашу небайдужість. Слава Україні! Героям слава!
So friends, the fighters of the Special Forces Company of the 1st Azov Corps, this equipment is very much needed right now. And believe me, the legendary Chervona Kolina Brigade and the 1st Azov Corps are doing everything to make sure the fiendish army disappears from our land forever. Your donation is a direct investment in saving the lives of our defenders and in destroying the evil forces. The link to donate is in the description of this video. There you'll find options for mono, private and PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. And as always, to each and every one of you, to everyone, I want to say a huge personal thank you for supporting Ukraine and our defenders. And we have finally completed the fundraiser for our artillerymen, for the 26th Brigade, for Dasha and her comrades, and for the 32nd Brigade, for Captain Anastasia of the Armed Forces of Ukraine from the 32nd Steel Brigade, who commands 6 crews, American Paladins. You know, today I was at an event where there were a lot of military personnel, and several of them came up to me. They said, "We watch you, thank you." And some came up and said, "You helped our brigade, I'm glad to finally see you here," and so on. And Grigory, thank you, but I felt so awkward, honestly. I want to say thank you to all of you from our viewers and from myself. They're all so modest, our military. I've told you 100 times already, they never ask for anything extra for themselves. So you have to pull it out of them with pliers. But now we know perfectly well who has the world's #1 army. Now we know this for sure, and the whole world knows it too. The European Union and the G7 are preparing a complete ban on maritime transportation of Russian oil. A radical tightening of sanctions against Russian oil. This would replace the mechanism that has been in place since the end of 2022. That price cap, which Russia, I think, started circumventing as early as the second day, is now being considered for replacement with a total ban on providing services related to the maritime transportation of Russian oil. But of course, the idea is a good one, but then there's still Orban, there's Fico, these pterodactyls and slugs of the world who are constantly going to throw a wrench in the works. It's important to clarify here. It sounds impressive, a complete blockade of Russian oil. But it's not a total blockade of all Russian oil transported by sea. It's only a ban on transportation by European tankers. And accordingly, insurance by European companies as well. So those 30%, roughly speaking, that Russia was transporting above board, they want to completely ban the provision of tankers for that. But on rust buckets flying the flag of Gabon or what else, Palau, they'll keep hauling that oil just like they always have. Currently, Western tanker and insurance companies are allowed to service this oil trade if the price is below the cap. But of course, Russia gets around it. They have several ways to do so. So it's good that Europe has finally acknowledged that since 2022 the price cap hasn't worked and the Russians have been falsifying things. They used documents and a shadow fleet, so they were bypassing the restrictions with ease. And the West admitted that they wanted to keep Russian oil but reduce Russia's profits from it, which is why they set the price cap. In other words, send us the oil, but your profits will be minimal. No need for any Russian oil at all, none. Thank you, goodbye. So, what's the main obstacle here? Greece, Cyprus, and Malta. Those who own the giant tanker fleets that, up until now, have been transporting Russian oil legally, but that's not all they've been doing, right? They've been doing ship-to-ship transfers, forging documents, and turning off transponders. So they were transporting it both legally and in the grey zone. But now a velociraptor enters the scene. The velociraptor of the oil market, tearing everyone apart with its teeth to shreds. Donald Trump steps in. This is the most important moment. Trump decided to simply clear the oil market for the US. You know, this was a unique situation where US business interests coincided with those of Ukraine. Many people actually doubted that Trump would impose sanctions against Russia. Isn't that right? Remember, I gave an ultimatum. 2 on strings, 2 on ropes accounts. Now, right now, the very last number 2 is about to come up. We all remember that, and then suddenly Rosneft and Lukoil came under sanctions. Even Putin, I remember when he was speaking either in front of journalists or just giving some press conference, he said, "We didn't expect Trump to impose them." What was that about? What happened? That was Trump clearing the way for his sponsors. Well, for his party's sponsors, let's put it that way, for his campaign sponsors. So for the US, there is actually a certain risk here. If too much oil is taken off the market, a spike in global prices is guaranteed, especially for gasoline. Well, Trump promised cheap fuel, so he doesn't want gas prices to spike, but he does want the price of oil to stay around $60 to $70 per barrel. That's why, if the ban is adopted, Russians will have to look for even more tankers for their shadow fleet. And Iran already has its own shadow fleet, and Venezuela has shadow fleets for everyone, but they are not unlimited. In general, we will have to buy more old tankers. Well, that's a big hello. Greta Thunberg. She will probably have to swim out into the open sea more than once if she doesn't go into politics completely, because this greatly increases the risk of an environmental disaster. The most dilapidated old tubs will be carrying this oil, patched up and barely holding together. So, Trump. What is he doing? This is important, I think. First of all, they are eliminating their main competitor in Europe, Russia, and taking over the market. In other words, they are setting records. The United States is exporting, selling to places where Russian oil used to go. They are saving their shale oil producers. This is important. That is, they are maintaining global restrictions. Prices are at $60 to $70 per barrel. Why? Because shale extraction, which in the US was called the shale revolution, both for oil and gas, is done using this method, the method of hydraulic fracturing. Basically, shale extraction is when you squeeze oil out of rock, figuratively speaking. In Russia, on the other hand, and that's why the production cost there, it's high-tech. In the US, it's high-tech extraction and the production cost is high. In Russia, so to speak, extraction is like scooping it out with a bucket. That's how it is in Western Siberia. And that's why there, the production cost is low. You just set up these pumps and off you go. So, for the price of oil to stay at $60 to $70, then everything is great for shale producers. Traditionally, Trump lobbies for lifting environmental restrictions, he lobbies for the interests of oil companies, and they, in turn, are sponsors of the Republicans. So you see what kind of connection there is here. So to kill off the Russians on the European market means to score points for yourself in future elections and to give more money to yourself and your party for upcoming elections. And we all remember Donald Trump's slogan, "Drill, baby, drill." He tried and is still trying to lift environmental restrictions within the US in order to ramp up production. This is exactly the moment when all of this suits us just fine. But the main nuance, why is it that the US will push for the maximum possible blockade of Russian oil sales? Because for the US to sell its more expensive oil, they absolutely need to remove readily available and cheaper oil, Russian oil, from the global market. That's where lies the main little secret, so to speak. In short, Donald Trump's great oil purge is working. And Trump took away the most solvent client, Europe. Russia sells to China. Russia sells to India, but with each deal, the discount gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And look what happened. In the gas market, too, American LNG and oil companies have captured the market share that Russia had been building up for 50 years. Just imagine, they kept building and building and building. And so, thanks to Putin's idiotic foreign policy, thanks to absolutely a stupid and losing war, he has now lost all of it. Well, that's Putin for you. What can you do? But probably the best sanctions are, yes, from the armed forces of Ukraine, strikes on the tankers of the Shadow Fleet. Now, like cockroaches, the owners of the Shadow tankers have scattered and are saying, "Screw this, we're not sailing to Novorossiysk." Those Ukrainian drones are there. By the way, I saw that Sea Baby drone in person today. It looks powerful, really powerful. And so, friends, to make sure no one can see this analysis and put two and two together in Russia and realize that Putin screwed up, so that absolutely no one can watch Tizenhausen on YouTube, Russia is lowering an iron information curtain, and they're doing it at some kind of cosmic speed. In the past 7 days, WhatsApp, Roblox, FaceTime, and Snapchat have been blocked in Russia. Have you ever seen such speed? Plus, they're currently testing this in different regions. They're shutting off mobile internet. They've already reached Moscow and St. Petersburg. There's a certain list of approved white websites. Those are the ones that keep working when mobile internet is turned off, but this is just a test. Soon, they'll shut everything down, so you'll only have access to the website. The truth, according to Putin, that's where you'll find all the information. And this morning the first reports appeared that users in Russia couldn't log in to the government services website, where all sorts of services are collected, except through the National Messenger. In other words, they're forcing people to install the National Messenger. The logic is very simple. They'll wipe everything out. They'll create their own localized cheburnet with approved websites with Blackjack and Patriarch Kirill. I think he'll be there. They're already launching an Orthodox messenger there. Everything as it should be. All alternative messengers in Russia are being shut down. They're leaving only Max, who watches over you. They'd be better off calling it Big Brother. And I think that, well, as a kind of bonus, like we're not beasts after all, they'll leave something like Telegram, start telling people that everything on Telegram is encrypted, no one can read your messages, no one will... But they'll force Telegram, and it's already cooperating, by the way, with Roskomnadzor. Hundreds of channels are being shut down every day. So let's put it this way. Durov claims that Telegram never, that it's independent, that it doesn't cooperate with anyone. But all his relatives are in Russia. His brother is in Russia. His parents are there. Come on, I beg you, isn't that a pressure point? The first thing the KGB used to do was always put pressure through the family. And here's another piece of news, a rather alarming one. Drones were spotted over the nuclear submarine base in France, and they opened fire on them. Hallelujah. They finally opened fire on the drones, 5 UAVs. So it wasn't just some random drone flying around or eco-activists, though they launched them from time to time too, but these were 5 fairly large drones. They were flying over a strategic base in Lille Long, where nuclear submarines with nuclear weapons are stationed. This base de Lille Long, is probably the most heavily guarded site in France. All 4 French Triomphant-class nuclear submarines are based there, and they carry those M51 nuclear ballistic missiles. The main question is, who could it be? Maybe it's Nicaragua launching the drones. No? Maybe it's Poland launching drones again? Russian drones that flew there, got tinkered with a bit, and then launched? No, of course not. The main theory: hybrid warfare and Russian involvement. But what were they doing? With these drones, they were basically probing the security protocol, so they launched cheap drones. Although we still need to figure out if they're cheap or not. That's what happened here. They force the radars to turn on, activate electronic warfare systems, and raise the alarm. They record all of this themselves. Either satellites or spy ships which pretend to be fishing somewhere nearby in neutral waters. They record the frequencies, timing, reactions, algorithms, and actions. In this way, they expose the security protocols.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
After the open sabotage in Poland, when the railway tracks were blown up and the catastrophe was narrowly avoided by sheer luck, it's important to talk about the fact that Russia is escalating the intensity of hybrid attacks. But the Kremlin thug only understands the language of force. Only that. That's why any attempts to negotiate after yet another aggressive Russian scenario, like this one for example, Putin will see it as weakness, as Europe's weakness, and will push even harder. In other words, Europe now has all the tools to really hurt old man Kabayev. Really hurt him. They just need to make a decision. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Here, we're fighting not only against Russian propaganda, but also exposing lies. Russian lies for which the Kremlin, I remind you, spends enormous amounts of money, but we're also making sure that Russia will never wash away the shame of this war. Everyone will always remember, though maybe in Russia's isolated internet some people might not remember. But in the civilized world, people definitely will, so subscribe and let's see how many of us there are. Meanwhile, the Botox jellyfish dreams of regaining its influence in Syria and is already preparing a new mess there. A new movement, as he likes to say. Assad's allies from Moscow are preparing an armed uprising in Syria. But we all understand that it's impossible to prepare an uprising in Syria from Moscow without the FSB's oversight, without their control. In other words, Putin dreams of getting the Russian bases back, and the uprising is being prepared precisely in the areas where those bases used to be. See what a coincidence that is. Putin couldn't bring Yanukovych back to Ukraine, so he decided to drag anyone back to Syria, dead or alive. But that was such a humiliating blow, Assad's expulsion from Syria. Putin, they didn't even have time to blink. And besides, Putin also made promises to the new president of Syria to continue cooperation, but Assad was not handed over. No one has seen Assad since he arrived in Moscow. There is information that he's there. Supposedly he's playing some computer games, living somewhere in Moscow city or in the Moscow suburbs. No one has seen him. I think he hasn't been living anywhere for a long time, although there could be other options. After all, they don't want to put Assad back in power. There are some very interesting details about this conspiracy. Why Assad specifically? They don't want to bring Assad back because he fled in disgrace. Even his own supporters don't want him to return. And there's this whole nest of vipers, like spiders fighting in a jar, battling over who will be the leader of this new revolution. So who's fighting? Two rivals. Kamal Hassan, nicknamed the Butcher, is a former head of military intelligence, the Mukhabarat. He's the man who ran those torture prisons. He lives in the Moscow suburbs and sends voice messages to commanders, promising to restore dignity to the Alawites. He believes that Assad was too soft, and of course sees himself as the new leader. And the second spider is Rami Makhlouf, the so-called wallet of the Assad regime. He is Assad's cousin and the former main oligarch of Syria. A couple of years before the regime fell, Assad took away Makhlouf's business and put him under house arrest. But now this Makhlouf has dipped into his stash. Apparently they didn't take everything from him and is creating his own private army. In other words, he claims that he is the true defender of the community, not the runaway Assad. And there will also be a battle for 14 new underground command centers that were built in Latakia and Tartus. Absolutely brand new. Assad finished building them right before his escape. And now these two spiders will fight for the territory and for these bunkers. They're preparing an army of up to 50,000 fighters from among former military personnel, as well as Alawites who fear revenge from the new authorities. The pay there will be minimal, but Putin simply wants it this way. You see, at first he was like, yes, we would really like to have Russian bases again in Syria with the new Russian president. And now he's setting him up, preparing a revolution. So, well, I don't think anyone will see Assad again. Maybe they'll cobble together some bad double like Putin's, the one who flies long distances and goes to the front. This double, Putin's double, he has a head like a cartoon character. It's stretched out horizontally, just like Mashanya's. Yeah, like that. Really? I don't know. Couldn't they have done it a little differently? Maybe it's from the overloads, from all the flights, the Botox got compressed or something. And there's another one. There's another candidate. Assad's brother, Maher Assad, he commanded the elite 4th Division. But he also wanted to join the conspiracy, but somehow he fell into depression. And rumor has it that he went on a drinking binge and lost his army. That's the story. Well, what can you do? What can you do? Friends, and as usual, here's a segment from our Crimean partisans. We talk about Crimea in almost every episode, so now that we have direct contact with the Crimean partisans and are in constant communication with them, we have the opportunity to receive interesting news from occupied Crimea. And I want to tell you there are some very interesting events happening there. So, well, you need to understand that the Crimean partisans are a movement with such a wide network of people. These aren't exactly partisans living in dugouts or forests, although those do exist too. It's a network of pro-Ukrainian people who are each doing what they can and making their contribution to help Ukraine and bring down the Russian regime. So, stones from the sky? That's how it is. After, at the Kacha airfield, drones destroyed it, MiG-29. It was simply epic. In one of the previous programs I showed it. It was an epic strike. Now the Russians are starting to get nervous because earlier radar systems were taken out on the drilling platforms, which used to detect in advance when drones would approach by water or by air and when missiles would arrive. Now there's a blind spot there, at least partially. And now they're really nervous. So, last night 41 drones struck the oil depot in Feodosia. Yes, not all of them made it, but some definitely did. The oil depot is already just the remains of an oil depot, the largest one in Crimea. It has burned down several times already, and this time it got hit again. And they also hit the radar station on Aipetri. Believe me, this is complex equipment, sophisticated radar stations. Russia can't restore them quickly. So now they're just sitting there thinking it's a blind spot and they don't know if something is flying there or not. Well, go ahead and guess. I've been to Aipetri, I've traveled all over Crimea, and it's upsetting that now there are such ghouls there, like Putin's appointee. Aksyonov claims that there are no problems in Crimea at all. Come on, please, how many reports will they write from Crimea saying there are no problems? By the way, Aksyonov recently called Crimea unsinkable. An unsinkable aircraft carrier. Do you know what's so cringe about this phrase? It's that Russia doesn't have a single aircraft carrier. So they have one aircraft carrying cruiser, the Admiral Kuznetsov, but attention, this cruiser is going to be scrapped for metal, meaning they're going to cut it up. Before that, it was under repair for a very long time. Some millions were poured into those repairs. There was a fire on it, So in the end, they decided, forget it, let's just cut it up. So much for your unsinkable aircraft carrier. In general, there have been a lot more strikes on Crimea lately, and they're more accurate too. Putin was making excuses for Crimea in India. That is, Mr. Modi said that we, India, are committed to the principle that territorial integrity must be respected. Because of Kashmir, it's a very sensitive topic for them, so due to separatism, because of Kashmir, this issue is sensitive for them. And Modi spoke about territorial integrity, and Putin couldn't come up with anything new. He came up with some nonsense, the kind he always comes up with. Do you know what he said? That in Crimea we didn't seize the port where the Black Sea Fleet was stationed. It was ours according to the agreement. So he was trying to make excuses that we didn't annex Crimea, like according to the documents, our fleet was stationed there. In other words, Putin was trying to sell India the idea that everything was legal. Well, just some kind of imbecile. I mean, a tenant is not the owner of the apartment. If Ukraine leased you a parking spot for your Black Sea Fleet ships, you don't own it, and even more so, you can't annex all of Crimea. Well, Putin, of course, lies all the time. Sometimes he just lies so blatantly. He just, looks at you with those fish-like eyes and lies like that. You just want to walk up and smack that bald head of his. I just don't know how you could hit someone through the screen. If that were possible, Putin would die in the very first second he started talking. So let me just remind you of the story. The agreement in 1997 was signed after the division of the Soviet fleet. An agreement was signed on the stationing. This was a big mistake, but all right, you can't change history now, on the stationing of the Black Sea Fleet on the territory of Ukraine. And Russia received the right to be based at the Black Sea Fleet base in several bays of Sevastopol for 20 years, until 2017. Next, the so-called Kharkiv agreements. Yanukovych comes to power. He's that puppet of Putin who later fled to Russia, now living somewhere near Assad, or something like that. And in 2010, without waiting for the end of the lease term, in 2010 he extends the stay of the Russian fleet until 2042. So what did Ukraine get in return? A $100 discount on gas. Basically, it was just rent. And Putin, of course, tries to lie about it somehow. And what's more, so following that logic, I want to turn to Moldova and say, listen, they also have something leased in Transnistria, and you could say the same to Armenia. There's the 102nd base in Gyumri, if I'm not mistaken. So tomorrow Putin could say, well, this is all according to our agreement, it's ours. Yeah, what is there to even say? He used to say that wherever a Russian soldier sets foot, that's Russian land. But in Ukraine, it's different. They say, wherever a Russian soldier sets foot, that's where he'll lose his leg. In Crimea, since we're still on this topic, in Crimea, nothing. Well, I mean, what season is it there now? Let's put it this way. Sensible people, when airfields are being hit, when radars are being hit, recently a drone storage base was struck, and not long ago the crews launching drones at Cape Chowder were wiped out. Basically, strikes happen regularly. But there are still those who go to Crimea for vacation, or so they think. Just imagine, they call that a vacation. And now it turns out that in Crimea, prices have suddenly gone up. And these people who came here for vacation, these crazy ones who have completely lost it, they started to complain. We came to Crimea, and here prices have gone up by 20, sometimes even 25%. What's going on? What's happening? Nothing is happening. It's the usual story. Crimea has been militarized, it won't be a resort for a long time. It will become a proper resort again when it returns to its home harbor. That's how things are. And also, I've been told separately that doctors in Simferopol and Sevastopol, they're taking doctors to the front. There's an unofficial rotation, and they are required to go to the front both in Simferopol and Sevastopol. There's a catastrophic shortage of surgeons and anesthesiologists. Basically, you can only make an appointment with a specialist a month in advance. It's nothing serious, don't worry. And there's no money, and there won't be any. I mean, Crimea was already subsidized by about 70%, and now all the money has gone to the war. Now no one will fix the pipes, no one will repair the roads. That's it, that's how it is. And you know what else it's come to? Teachers in Crimean schools are being forced to check the phones of high school students for Ukrainian Telegram channels or to see if VPN services are installed. Can you imagine? Welcome to the digital gulag. And as for those crazy old ladies talking about stones falling from the sky, they didn't look closely. It wasn't stones, it was drones. And now comes an awakening for the Russian military, the former commander-in-chief of the Russian ground forces. Vladimir Cherkin, you know what? He stated that they underestimated the enemy and overestimated their own troops. According to him, the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service assured the Kremlin that 70% of Ukrainians would greet Russia with flowers. Only 30% would be against it, but in reality, as it turned out, everyone saw what happened. And the most shocking news for Russians, finally, the Russian government has targeted something sacred. Russians will see a sharp increase in the minimum price of vodka. That's how it is, Dmitry Medvedev. Right now, you see somewhere in the background, he's probably listening to this offensive program. And today is a day off for him, so he's already had a little to drink into every room. There's a reason we call him the half-liquid Terminator here. He's spread out in little pools of ethanol in different rooms. And now, having heard the news that the minimum price of vodka will go up, those drops quickly gather together like liquid Terminators. Medvedev, what do you say? He's just rushing now. He's broken out of his kennel in the Kremlin courtyard, snapped off his chain, and is racing on his tricycle, heading to the State Duma to find out who decided to push this initiative. That's how it is? Well, friends, that's the news for today. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Subscribe to this channel, and I ask you, let's help our Azov. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. All the necessary details are there. Let's help the legendary Azov. I'm sure we'll close the fundraiser for them today. Have a peaceful day, everyone, and glory to Ukraine.